right? So sometimes you need a catalyst for another wave of B2C companies to come in, whether it's in VR or IR or voice or a combination.
Keyvan, Mohajer, welcome back to the VoiceBot podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I was looking at my notes or the last time we got together, and I interviewed you almost 4 years to the week for the podcast. It was the first time you'd been on the podcast. A couple of your colleagues had been on since. But yeah, it's been quite a 4 years, I think.
Yeah, and I remember that podcast. I think I was in a hotel in Japan or something, and I took that call. And a lot of people wrote to me and they said they really liked that podcast. So thank you for doing that.
Well, I'm glad. I thought it was great, and I remember that one too. We had some technical difficulties. I had someone I was in my house, my home studio. Someone was cutting down a tree, so I moved into a closet. So it would be the sound would be good, and then my Wi-Fi wasn't good there. I remember it took us like 10 minutes to get sorted in the beginning, but yeah, it was fun. It was great, and you did such a great job, sort of telling the origin story of SoundHound, and that was a momentous week because that came out the day you announced that you'd raised $100 million, which was like, I don't know, 13 months after you'd raised 75. So, ton of momentum for the company at that point.
Yeah. And we've made a lot of progress since then.
I know, like a bona fide unicorn, right? Is like out in the market, and actually a public unicorn, not just a private on paper. So that's a whole different thing. Well, I'll tell you what we should do is I do want to talk about the SPAC or going public. I do want to talk about the new business model. I want to talk about that interviewing period, but we probably should spend just a couple minutes going through the origin story. We'll send like some of the detail. People can go back to the original one because it's still going to be true. But you founded while you were still, I think you were still a graduate assistant, weren't you, when you founded SoundHound originally?
Yes, I was a PhD student at Stanford. Maybe to give you the audience a little bit of background, I was an entrepreneur in undergrad, started 3 companies at the ages of 19, 20, and 21. But what I really wanted to do, I didn't want to be a serial entrepreneur. I wanted to make one company and make a big impact. And I wanted to be a technical founder to a very high-tech company. So then I had to go to grad school. So I got my PhD in electrical engineering at Stanford. And I was looking for what would be that next big thing that would make a big impact. This is the year 2000. This is before, Android, iPhone, Siri. So a long time ago. And I thought, well, let me look at what they have in Star Trek that we don't have, right? So the obvious ones are spaceships that go faster than light, and teleportation, and holodecks, and replicators, and voice AI. Like they talk to robots and they talk to computers and they had a conversation, and we just watched those shows and assumed it's normal, but we didn't really have them in our lifetime. And I thought the one that would happen for sure, and in my lifetime, is voice AI. We will be talking to computers, we will be talking to robots, we will be talking to devices. And it's not just dictation, they understand the meaning behind what you're saying and they respond and you have a conversation, you can get them to do things. And I want to be a part of that. So I chose my thesis to be in speech recognition and machine learning and did that for 5 years. And I felt ready in 2005 to start SoundHound.
Well, what timing, actually, if you think about it, starting 10 years earlier, certainly conversational natural language processing, conversational AI, had some history before you were focused on it. But you sort of entered at the time of the deep learning revolution.
Yes, it was a few years before deep learning. It was one of those things that I thought it would happen within 20 years. Like this is the early 2000. I thought in 20 years, we would be talking to things. And in fact, when I went to the first investors, that's what I told them. I said, in 20 years, we'll talk to things. And I want to create a company to make that happen. Obviously, nobody funded that because 20 years is too long.
Right.
So our path to success was unusual and different. But we kind of predicted that there will be technological breakthroughs that would pave the way, and some of it would come from us, and some of it would come from outside. And deep learning was definitely one that push the boundaries. But we also innovated. We came up with a new way to do natural language understanding that does, the complex conversations that no one else has been able to do yet. And we're very proud of those and other things. So happy to talk more about the core tech.
Yeah. So, I think it's worth revisiting too that SoundHound, I think, when we spoke 4 years ago, was still best known as a music identification app. I don't think that's true anymore. I still think there's a big consumer group that knows of that app, and I think and I kudos to you because I think it's it's always significant to have created something that has that much awareness, stature, usage. Uh, but you started out with this idea that you wanted to create an assistant, and somehow you basically decided, or someone decided for you, that you needed to go into music recognition because that was where the demand was.
Yeah, so we started with voice recognition, and we also wanted to, like some people think we pivoted from music recognition to voice recognition, but it's actually the other way around. We started with voice recognition, and we wanted to own the core tech. We didn't want to license it from someone else because we thought that the value is going to come from owning the core technology so that you can push the boundaries both in terms of technology and the business model. And that was a 10-year journey. And I think it would be a 10-year journey now. Like if somebody wanted to say, let's get into voice AI and build a platform, it would take many years. And you see companies try, and I usually say it takes 3 or 4 years to realize it will take 10 years. So some companies try to build their own, and it's just a lot of work. And it's not practical for a company to be a startup and spend 10 years in R&D. So we started productizing parts of it, and saying the name of a song, like speaking the name of a song or artist, was one of the first ideas that we made. And then to make it interesting, we also had a humming search, so you could actually hum a song. So it's still human voice. We did a really good job. We were the first to do it right. And then we added a recorded audio recognition, so if the song is playing in the background, so just to complete. So we thought we had a product that every way to search for music, we provided humming, singing, speaking, holding to the radio, and typing. And that app was at the right time. When the App Store launched, we were one of the first there, and we had more than 300 million downloads. And that actually funded the company, right? So we spent 10 years doing R&D. In the first 10 years, we raised very little money and managed to monetize. The more important impact of it was it helped us attract talent, it helped us attract more funding, and it helped us become good at building products. Because the core DNA of the company was we were a bunch of scientists, and I personally didn't appreciate at the beginning how important it is to build good products and design and graphics and UI, and I learned to appreciate all that. So it helped us, prepared us for the next phase. But we always were working on building the core tech in voice AI. So from day one, where we got our funding, we allocated a team to build our own speech engine, our own MLU engine, and we kept making that team bigger and better. And it was 10 years later when we finally unveiled it.
So let me ask you a question, though, just to refine the point here. What does it take to transition a technology from speech recognition to music recognition?
So in music recognition, we did speech recognition, so you could speak the name of a song or artist,
right.
And that also helped us collect data, right? So because you can build a good technology and you don't have a lot of data, you're at a disadvantage. So we've been collecting data for 15 years, and then the humming search. Still, you have to process voice, but it was a different technology to match the melody, and if the user sang with the lyrics, you use that. So we had to build a different technology. And the music identification also is a different. Again, you deal with sound, so we are good at understanding sound, and the name SoundHound is a very good name for the company. But again, the matching algorithm is different. The database is different. The scaling, when you have like millions and millions of users hitting you, the learning from that applies to all the components, but the search algorithms are quite different.
when you came back to, and that's probably not the right way to say it because I know that the voice assistant was continually being developed in the background, but when the voice assistant became the focus once again, and you were maybe de-emphasizing what you were doing from the music recognition side, what do you think that you learned through the music recognition which influenced the way that you took the voice assistant forward?
Well, a lot. So again, scaling, in servers, being able to handle billions of queries. Uh, that's something that you need to learn over time, and you're very good at that. Learning to build good products and caring about user experience and A/B testing and so on. That's something that learning very much carried over to all the voice products that we made. Um, and the data we collected was extremely helpful. So we started, with tons of data, and we are not at a disadvantage compared to some of the big tech players in terms of data. Like probably one of the top few companies in terms of the amount of training data that we've accumulated.
Right. Yeah. Because such a unique background that you had. Now, you mentioned this idea about learning about product and the important thing that you had, the important learnings that you had there. And, 300 million downloads, a consumer application standalone, very successful by just about every metric that you could come across. And yet then you deployed what I think is one of the most intriguing demonstration apps, the Hound Assistant, that I've seen. And yet you did not turn that into a consumer product. You really focused on the white label business. Why was that?
Well, we thought about, eventually it's about the sequence of things, right? So we thought there was a big void and demand for product creators to have their own assistant under their own brand and not lose their users and data and brand to a third-party assistant. That demand was so big, and it's still growing, right? So we thought enabling other products that are already successful, like cars and appliances and IoT devices and services, the friction is lower as opposed to creating like a new consumer brand and app from scratch. So we declared that our focus is the platform, the voice AI platform to power others, and the app is being used to demonstrate how good that technology is.
Right.
It doesn't mean that one day we will not try to make that app a huge consumer success, but it's about when the world is ready, right? The world is ready for other products to have their own assistant, whether consumers are ready to use the mobile app. I mean, if you look at Google Assistant, Google put a lot of resources behind the mobile app, but we don't think that was a huge success in terms of consumer adoption of the app. Now, the Google Assistant in other products is used, but as people use the Google app more than the consumer app, Google Assistant app, in my view.
Yeah, I think that's right. They do. I mean, I think they did just announce that they had 700 million MAUs on Google Assistant, but lot
it's
of
probably in other products, right? It's embedded in other products in their own assistant and so on.
Right. Well, just native to Android, right? Without the app itself. So, yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Maybe we'll come back to it. My sense is that the market will accept now and maybe demand eventually an independent player. And I think that's probably the next level of voice assistant adoption for the general purpose assistants, general purpose consumer assistants, is going to come from an independent, probably not from the big tech incumbents. But I understand, I mean, there is that key point of friction that it's an app model, no matter where you deploy it, unless you own the underlying infrastructure and the OS.
Right. Yeah, and we have the passion to make a consumer app very successful. As it's just about how to time things, right? So, and we just saw a huge demand for cars and TVs and IoT devices and services that to want this. So we focused on that first.
Okay.
It's also it's an interesting thing if you look at the cycle of big tech. The there's a shift from consumer to enterprise. So there's
Yes.
maybe a decade that the consumer play is the attractive play, and then there's a decade that the enterprise play is the attractive play. And when we were ready with our technology and platform, we were in the enterprise season. So
when did the enterprise season start, do you think? What year? The most recent one? The one we're in?
Yeah, I think it was around the time that we launched our platform. And that's when, yeah, and I remember like for fundraising, if you were a consumer app, like if you were B2C, at some point it was like very fundable. And then it changed. You had to be kind of an enterprise, and that became really fundable. And then B2C became a little bit, it lost its attractiveness. And I think it's just cycles that we go through. And we just happened to be ready during the enterprise season. And you saw Microsoft, for example, became very successful as a more of an enterprise play. They positioned themselves there, and it was a very good move at the right time for them.
Yeah, it's a great observation. I agree with that we have enterprise seasons, we have consumer seasons. And so I think you're pegging it around 2018 that it shifted strongly to enterprise. Is that correct?
Probably, yeah. I think it was before that because we saw it happen, or we saw it was happening, and we strategized. But you're right. When we launched Hound and the platform, I remember maybe a year before that, when in fundraising activities, we put equal emphasis on both. So yeah, we have this app and we have this platform, and they both have a lot of potential. But as we kind of went forward, the platform just had so much more demand that kind of took over.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, so then we might be 4 to 5 years away from the ascendant B2C. If the decade, what is that? 9 years, 14 years? I mean, but we're a few years away from the ascendancy of the next B2C phase. Is that your estimate?
I mean, there could be a new, there might be new catalysts for that. Sometimes you need that. Like the mobile app store was a catalyst for kind of new type of companies like Instagram and WhatsApp are purely created on a mobile ecosystem. Right, like billions of dollars of values were created. They wouldn't exist without a mobile ecosystem, right? So sometimes you need a catalyst for another wave of B2C companies to come in, whether it's in VR or IR or voice or a combination.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so that really good context here, I think, for anybody who's paying attention to this space. Now, let's talk about this intervening period, 2018, your last big fundraising round, and then going public this year. What were the key things that changed about your business over those 4 years?
Well, first we announced our platform, and we think we were the first to announce voice AI as a platform to enable other developers and there were two types of developers that build products and developers that have content and services, right? So we spelled out that vision very clearly in our announcement. You were the first to do it. You were a pioneer. We were thinking about that for years. And it was a very good idea. So very quickly, some of the big tech players followed, and they had more resources. I remember when we made our announcement and Amazon made their announcement maybe a few weeks later, and it was kind of identical. And then people told me, how are you going to compete with big tech? And I always say, I heard somewhere, I don't know if this is true or not, but the number one reason people drown is fear. Like if you're in a very stormy situation and people give into fear, and then they drown, right? And if you're not afraid, you have a much higher chance of surviving, right? So I always remind my colleagues, don't be afraid, because that's the step one to complete failure, right? So what it means is the equation changed, right? So how can we go back to the drawing board and say, okay, all these competitors and players are variables in this complex equation. So if the equation changes, how can we find a way to take advantage of it, right? So what happened was that Amazon launched, and they're a great company, and innovated a lot, so a lot of respect for them. But they launched their Alexa platform, and they had $100 million Alexa fund, right? And it said basically every little company that wants to use Alexa, they can also get some funding, right? And that's what really scared my colleagues. Like, how are you going to compete with that? We can't, we don't have 100 million. So we came up with the idea, again, going back to drawing board and change the equation. We said, well, let's do the opposite of the Alexa fund. So we're going to create a $100 million funding round, right? So instead of us investing in small companies and most of those companies fail, let's go to big companies that also feel threatened by, the big tech moves, and we let them invest in us, let them be shareholder in us. And Amazon is not going to go and invest in those big companies because those are big public companies. So we did the reverse, and we brought $100 million to our company, and in return, we globalized our platform, right? So we raised money from China and built the Chinese version. We raised money from Japan, built the Japanese version, French version, German version, and we globalized from one language to 22 languages using that strategy. And a lot of those investors became our customers, and they adopted us. It created loyalty, and we call them the Collective AI Alliance, right? So, and that strategy was, in hindsight, a great move. It gave us resources. It helped us globalize. It helped us create industry allies and get adoption. And some of these cycles, getting to cars, can take years, and it helped us go through those cycles. And now we have proven adoption.
Yeah. So it sounds also like, the traditional view is you need 18 months of funding every time you're using venture capital, but you were looking for more than 18 months of funding because you knew the cycles were going to be longer and you needed that war chest.
Yeah, and we also wanted to globalize, right? So each language can take time and resources, and if you're committing to 20 plus languages, so yeah, we took a big bite at funding, and we delivered. And went from one language to 22 languages, with more to come. We have more languages than some of the big tech players. It's really hard to add languages, and we've become good at it. So we'll add more.
How much of that language expansion was driven by your early foray into automotive? Because we know that most of the automotive manufacturers are global. They sell into a lot of different countries, and they've historically had this issue where they didn't want to have a technical solution that could only be used in one country or two countries or one region.
Yeah, we learned early on that if we only had one language, we wouldn't be able to get the right meetings. Now, you don't have to have 100 languages, but if you can show that you have, some of the basic languages that cover big part of your demand, and you are able to add, then it opened the door. And absolutely, it was kind of a chicken and egg problem, right? So you need to have the languages to get those meetings, and we needed to have the meetings to add the languages. But the strategy of raising money from the potential customers and committing to deliver those languages was the way to go.
So the other thing that I observed that changed in that period is I saw you 2017, 18 is really a horizontal play. And you started to do a lot more verticalization. Now, it might have just been packaging. Maybe it was technical effort as well. But, is that a correct interpretation of what happened?
Yeah. So, just like how we realized that maybe a mobile app, the world is not ready for that, but are much more ready for an enterprise play. We also learned that being in the business of providing ingredients to voice AI, we might be a few years away from that being the world being ready for that. And I was inspired by some post I saw that if you have a pound of steel, you can sell it for $300, and if you turn that into horseshoe nail, you can sell it for 3,000, and if you sell it to watch spring, is $300,000. So it's the same material, but you specialize it and you create more value. Now, Today, the world is ready for you to be in the steel business. You just provide the raw ingredient and you focus on that. And there are so many talented companies that can turn that into different products, and you just focus on the ingredient. In voice AI, we realized that we might be a few years away from just focusing on the ingredient and letting other people productize it in smart ways. That is our trajectory and our vision. But do we have to wait a few years for the world to become ready? What do we do in the meantime? So we decided we have to package it in different solutions, right? And we came up with a strategy that is very clever. I want to tell you about it. We call it the 3-pillar strategy. So we voice enable products. That's pillar 1, like physical products. So a car, a TV, an IoT device, a smart speaker, smart appliance. That's pillar 1. Pillar 2 is when we voice enable services, right? So when you call a restaurant, for example, they usually don't pick up the phone, or when they pick up the phone, they are very distracted. Then we go to restaurants and we have built a solution for them that we pick up the phone, we take the order using our voice AI. So this is pillar 2, where we voice enable services. And then pillar 3 is when we bring them together. We bring these services inside the products. So let's say you're driving a car, you talk to your car to control the air conditioning and the radio and music and navigation. And while you're driving, you can also find restaurants and order food. You talk to your car. You don't have to go to the restaurant. You don't have to call the restaurant. You don't have to use a mobile app. You just talk to your car. As an end user, this is fascinating, right? Because it's so convenient. For the restaurant, they got a new lead because this is not their user. It's a user of the car. And there's a rev share from the restaurant to us, which we share with the car maker. So now the car maker is happy because first, they made the user happier. 2, they generate revenue for the first time, incrementally. So this 3-pillar that creates this ecosystem, creates the flywheel effect. So more users adopt it, more products adopt it, more services adopt it, and it just keeps getting better and better. And it also puts us on a trajectory to increase revenue per device, right? Because if you're in the licensing business, the revenue per device, there's a push to decrease it, right? So the product creators keep pushing to decrease. Every year you have to decrease your price, and you just have to get on more devices. But if you look at revenue per user of companies like Google and Facebook, it's increasing every year. It's 10x. So by adding this monetization of the interaction, we put ourselves on the path of increasing revenue per device. And because we are sharing that revenue with the device maker, now more devices will adopt it, right? Because before, only devices that could afford the licensing cost could adopt voice AI. But now even a light bulb can adopt voice AI because there is a path to monetization. So that's the strategy that we've taken on, and it's working really well.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because I think that's a core part of your pitch to the public markets when you're going out recently. I remember looking at the model showing your revenue to date, and that it was largely licensing. You had a very small amount of subscription. I think no monetization, or maybe it was a sliver at the bottom.
Small, yeah.
But over the next, a little bit of a change this year, but actually starting next year and the year after, a very significant revenue shift in terms of that mix. What first, maybe tell people the difference between how you characterize licensing revenue and subscription revenue, and then we can break down a little bit more about the assumptions behind the monetization piece.
Yes, all pillar 1, 2, 3, right? So licensing is pillar 1, and you're right. The majority of our revenue is pillar 1 now, and a lot of that is contracted. So we have massive booking numbers that will get realized over the next few years. So there's a lot of foundation here. And then for services, we have kind of a service fee, subscription, monthly fee, plus rev share on the transaction. And pillars 1 and 2 are independent, right? They're proven business models that are independent, so you can grow them. Like the success of one doesn't depend on the other. And then pillar 3 it's kind of automatically happens, right? Because for monetization, you're not saying you're doing spammy ads or something that would uh, damage the user experience, right? So it's users are already talking to their cars to get things done, and then all of a sudden they can also order food and book appointments and other things. So it's going to be very seamless, and it's just turning on a domain on the platform by by the device makers.
Okay, so the first two pillars, uh, voice enabling products, voice enabling services, as you say, independent. That makes a lot of sense to me, and actually makes more sense to me. It's in as you're explaining it, and that you could see a really significant rise in subscription to match your licensing revenue. So that makes, because you have visibility into that, you've been working on that for a while, you have new products coming out. Okay. The monetization piece, I'm interested in your assumptions behind that, because that is the shall we call it serendipity of the model, that you get these increasing returns from the synergy of the two. How are you forecasting? Like, how do you model that to say, okay, this isn't really happening today, but we're expecting it to happen?
Yeah, so we are very conservative in our forecasts. So we have published a deck that if you look at monetization per user of companies like Google and Facebook 10 years ago, or even 12 years ago, they started at maybe $3 or $4 and then went to $30 to $40 in the last 10 years. And that's global. So if you look at the US space, is $280 or so for Google. But we projected start with 30 cents and go to $3 in the next several years, right? So very conservative. And but it's the building blocks of it will already be there, right? So because again, let's go to the food ordering example. We will power restaurants, we get their menu, we integrate with their POS system, and they pay us, a subscription fee and a per order fee. So that's already happening, right? Now, all of a sudden, instead of just serving the users that call them, we also serve the users in cars and TVs and IoT devices. So that we don't have to go and build a new company to make that happen. It's all just connecting some dots, and the business model is there, the flow of fund is there, the contract is there, the transactions, everything is already happening. It's just unleashing it to kind of a new set of user base. And we have very conservative revenue model.
Okay. So the monetization piece, then, it sounds like there's essentially a referral fee and it's a % of the sale. Is that always the case?
Yeah, I mean, there will be some advertising opportunities as well, but going to the vision of the company, user experience is number one for us, right? So monetization is kind of line. We have a 4-line vision, and monetization is line 4. So the first line is making the tech superhuman, right? So making computers better than humans in language understanding. So that is not there yet, right? So we know computers are better than humans in computing, but they're not always better than us at tasks, right? So it's just the algorithms and the technology that needs to improve. But imagine if computers are better than humans, right? The world will be better, right? Because you can ask them more complicated things. So that's kind of a first line of our vision. The second line is delighting the users, right? We have to deliver value and delight to the end user. So now to your question, you're not going to do a lot of advertising or spammy things that make the user unhappy. It's all going to be things that deliver value to the user, right? So if you really want to order food, we have a way for you to do it, and yes, you'll get paid from the restaurant. If you want to book an appointment with a doctor, with a dentist, with a nail salon, with a hair salon, so all of those we can do. Now there might be some promotional opportunities also for the business owners, but it's going to be very subtle.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, because like % of transaction is a little more complicated, because people might pay at the restaurant, for example, and then as opposed to like a flat fee or something else. And there's also other products that maybe the first contact doesn't actually consummate the sale. So I was just, and then there's also the issue of whether these other customers in the restaurant industry want to opt into this. I mean, maybe they do, maybe they don't. So I was just wondering about those nuanced elements of that business
And
model.
we provide a choice to business owners if they want to opt into lead generation, and there will be a fee for leads, and they already pay those fees. Like for example, again, going to the restaurants, they pay companies like DoorDash and
Mm-hmm.
so on, like very significant fees for leads. So,
Okay, got it. Now, it would be remiss of me not to ask you. So you came out into the market for a few days. The stock price went down and up, and then all of a sudden, like I think it was the following Monday, or it was 10 days later, it jumped almost 70% in a day, and then now it's back down. So, what is your official position on that? What's going on?
um, well, the market is volatile, and for us, we think long term, right? So for us, it was about entering the public market, and yeah, it was the worst week since 2008. Like when we actually entered, I heard that it was the worst week since 2008. And then when people say worst, it means it's going to get better, but it got worse, right?
Yes.
So there's volatility, and we knew it was going to go up. It could go up or down, and we had prepared ourselves and our team. We need to think long term, and the volatility at the beginning is not that important as long as we have the resources, we raise enough money in the transaction to execute, and we just focus on the execution, and if we deliver the value that we think we are going to deliver long term, we should get credit for it.
Yeah, sure. And what was the total amount raised?
We raised over 100 million we had filings, so it's
Yeah.
public information now. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So just for the context of everyone here. Yeah, what is interesting, and all the headlines were like, why did SoundHound go up by 50? They're all different depending on when they wrote the article. 30%, 50%, 68%. But there was nobody knew, like nobody could point to anything in particular that suggested that it would make that really big upward movement. And I'm not sure anybody can point to anything where it's come down back down since then. And so that's accurate, correct? Like there's no like key news that came out or other catalyst event that really impacted your stock price that week.
Yeah, we are a recognized brand. So
Yes.
again, we've been around for 17 years, and people recognize our brand. There's a positive association with our brand. I've read here and there that we are the only voice AI company that could go public, right? So,
yes,
if you look at, there were in the last 1 or 2 years, multiple EV companies, like electric vehicle companies, multiple LiDAR companies, flying taxis. There's multiple, but one voice AI company, and that's SoundHound. So we have a lot of uniqueness around us, and people dig in to the story, and the world is being voice enabled. Voice is the next disruption. Voice is a natural way to interact with things. Voice should have been, the way to interact with these devices. It's just the technology wasn't ready. That's why we had to build keyboard and mouse and other things, right? But voice was, a 3-year-old can speak, right? They don't have to learn how to use the computers. So voice is really the way. And if people dig in, they see the potential. We claim to have the best tech in voice AI, and we demonstrate it. We have proven adoption. And some companies that go public, they still have to win customers and build their product. But we have proven adoption, and we have massive contracts, committed contracts. So I think people who dig in, they see the potential, and SoundHound could be the next big tech, right? You can't say that about a lot of companies, right? Which company can you invest that can go up by, a large amount? And SoundHound has that potential. But the market has been volatile, right? I mean, last week was a bad week, and who knows what's next?
This week's not better.
But again, we think long term, and we're super excited about our trajectory.
And just for people who are watching this or listening to this afterwards, which is going to be most people, we're recording this on May 12th. So the context here is May 12th, 2022. So you can always just, if you want to look, you can see what was going on in the market. And I think it is interesting, though, that in particular, I hesitate to call you a tracking stock for the industry, but you're singular in that you're the only pure play in the market. So you could have made an argument that Nuance was that, although Nuance was very much an enterprise play that was really tied to a couple of specific markets, particularly over the last 2 years. But they've been taken out, and so they're part of Microsoft now. Cerence, the other kind of pure play, but it's only in automotive. So it's a pure play voice in automotive. And you are in that general purpose. So you're working in automotive or working in some other areas. So it is a unique position. I suspect anyone who wants to go long on voice AI will probably have some position in SoundHound in their portfolio. But it's, there's no one else who's ready to come out at this scale.
And we think that won't change. Obviously, you can underestimate smart people out there, but it's just not practical to spend a decade and hundreds of millions of dollars to build voice AI. It's just the path we went through. It wasn't easy. We were not an overnight success. It was very painful. It was long. It's a long journey and a lot of ups and downs and challenges. But we are where we are, and we are fortunate that, again, the world needs voice AI, and we have a really good independent platform, and the only one that can serve multiple industries globally. And it's just not practical for someone to go on, let's do the same thing. You can't raise $300 million and spend 10 years doing R&D. And I've seen companies try, like there are big companies that said, let's build our own voice AI, and years later, you don't really see much.
Yeah, well, it's a sideline for everybody else, right? It's a feature in service of their other products and services, as opposed to the core of the business, which makes sense. Well, let's talk about industries for a moment. So I think, early on, I remember Hyundai and then Mercedes, Honda more recently. So automotive is a really interesting market here. And automotive has changed a lot from where we were when you landed your first automotive client. There was a sense that there were two options. People were either going to have something they had in-house that they completely owned, either it's a white label solution or they built it themselves, right? And so, or they were going to, potentially just use something from Google or something from Amazon, which would give them not as much control, but might give them other services or things like that. And what we've seen is like every company makes multiple announcements. And so it's very hard to understand, is there one voice assistant? Are there many voice assistants? Are some models have one and some have the other? And sometimes if you break it down, you can find out like what they mean. But most of the time, ambiguity rules. So what is going on in the automotive voice AI market? Is it this multi-assistant future? Is it one? How are they doing it?
So there's definitely some transient phase that people are figuring it out. But we can just fast forward. So where would it converge, right?
Okay, yeah, good.
So some people say, will there be one assistant like everywhere, or will there be multiple assistants? And obviously, we think there will be multiple assistants. And the way we prove it is with an example, right? Let's say there will be a day where we will live among robots. 10 billion people, 10 billion robots. Will all of those robots have the same name? Obviously not. You're not going to say Alexa, 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 right? So every robot will have its own name, its own personality. They will be good at different things. Some of them will be doctors. Some of them will be teachers. Some of them will clean your house. Some of them will, they'll be your friend and companion. And they will be created by different product creators, right? Now, they can all tap into one central platform that You don't have to teach every robot languages and the weather domain and the restaurant domain. They can all tap into the knowledge domain, but then the product creator can specialize it and brand it and add their own innovation on top of it. So we think that will be the future, where we live among robots and every robot will have its own name and personality and expertise. So that's where we will converge. Now, today, if car companies have to realize that they need to become better software companies, or they will not exist in a few years, right? So there's an analogy of what Tesla is doing, for example, to the car industry is what Apple did to the smartphone industry, right? So when Apple was not the first smartphone, and when they came out, they were small, and other big phone companies ignored them and dismissed them, and within 2 years they didn't exist. It's not like they lost market share, like they didn't exist. Now in the auto industry, it won't be 2 years because the cycles are longer. It might be 5 to 10 years. But the same thing could happen unless if the car companies become better at software, become more agile, become faster, and differentiate with software. And if they just outsource the whole operating system to one company, then they just become a shell to that company. So the users become users of that company, and their product becomes a shell, and there's no differentiation. Then eventually, it's like how many Android phone makers were there at the beginning, and how many of them succeeded, right? Most of them didn't succeed. So we think car companies should be aware that they need to be software companies. They need to have their own assistant. They need to control their own interface and their own user and their own brand. And there's a good provider. There's SoundHound. We can provide a really good technology so that they don't need to sacrifice quality to also they get the best of both. They get better tech with friendly terms. So we see that industry is becoming aware of that. They're learning that. It's not overnight, but and then multiple assistants could coexist, right? So we will be the default branded assistant in the car. But if you really want to talk to an assistant on your phone or a third-party assistant, there could be a path to those. And we will work with our customers to make that happen.
So one of the strengths of Google in the automotive space is mapping. So they have an assistant, they have lots of other services, but they have maps, directions, and the most popular ones in the world, right? The ones that have the most users. So how do you compete with that? Do you partner with Here or one of the, Garmin or one of the other players? Do you just tap into Google services? Because I know they've been sort of restricting those in some environments. How do you deal with that in the automotive space in particular?
We don't provide our own map, but our customers choose their map provider, and then we just work with them, right? So yes, we have worked with Here, we have worked with TomTom. In some cases, we would work with Google. I mean, that's totally okay. It's not an issue.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so you mentioned restaurants a few times, and so I think that's interesting. You had the White Castle announcement not too long ago, so that's the drive-through. But you also, just mentioned this idea of calling into the restaurants. Tell me a little bit about the restaurant space, because this isn't a space I don't think you were in 2 years ago, but it seems like a big strategic push for you now.
Yeah, we started about 2 years ago thinking about it and working on it, but announcements have been more recent, but it's been years in the making.
Okay.
So when we came up with the 3-pillar strategy, the one we picked was food ordering as the first one. And we thought that food ordering for us is what books were to Amazon, right? So Amazon started selling books first. They only sold books. And they became very good at it.
Yes.
And they started selling more things. And the learning they had from selling books carried over to selling the music CDs and eventually everything from A to Z now, right? So we thought, let's do food ordering because of a number of reasons. Food ordering was the right choice, and it's a hard one to do right. And we like to take on hard challenges, but once we do it well, it will be easy to then add other types of services on top of it.
Got it. And so your sense is that that market's not well served today in this space because it's changed a lot. And I know there's a lot of folks who are investing in this technology. In fact, some of the really big restaurant chains have bought voice AI technology to integrate. Some of them have then turned around and decided they weren't going to use it after they acquired it. But obviously that market's changed a lot in the last 2 years, particularly the labor shortages completely changed the level of urgency around automation.
Yes, one of the reasons we pick food ordering is because it's really hard to do well, and our technology is very suitable for it. For example, we have a unique approach to NLU, or natural language understanding, that allows us to understand very complex conversations. And when people want to order food, they have complex queries, right? They want a burger that has this and that and not that and that. And sometimes they order like 3 things in one query, and then they follow up and I want to change the first one or second one. And we are so good at that, right? And others are not. So it is underserved. The area is the industry is underserved, and the demand is high, right? Because of the shortage of staff, and it's just the adoption and has been incredible. We actually have to put people on the waiting list, like for when we built the food ordering for phone lines, and now we are ready to take on new customers. We have to put them on a waiting list, right? Because you have to gradually process them and so on. Not many players, usually players they don't have the core tech, so they're light using APIs from others. And we think it's very critical to have the core tech to succeed, because you need to change the core tech. Like for food ordering, the menu items are not part of the regular English vocabulary, right? So you can't use an off-the-shelf ASR. You can do it, maybe it will work half the time, but then it just fails very quickly. So you need to be able to adapt it. You need to be able to handle complex queries. And again, we are very suitable to do a really good job there.
Yeah. So, and I think of your probably most famous demonstration, which is with the Hound app, where people would ask for a certain type of restaurant. It's this, but not that. It's near this. It has this, doesn't have that. And I always thought that was like, geez, you know what? That's not that common. Like humans aren't like that precise about the restaurant, like finding a restaurant. But you're right. They are that precise about the food order. And so it's ultimately like the perfect application of that combination of features.
Absolutely. And, when we gave those demos, originally I thought, if there's a Ferrari that has 1,000 horsepower, you may never use the 1,000 horsepower, but
sure,
the demonstration is, you love it, right? So I was kind of pitching it that way, that see how amazing our technology is, see what great things it can do. But I saw that people are actually adopting those complex queries. The reason they don't use it now is because they don't think assistants will work. But once they realize that the assistant can keep up, they start using it. I'll give you actually a simple example. If you're looking for a restaurant and you had Chinese food yesterday, so today you don't want Chinese, you will ask the concierge in a hotel, can you show me restaurants except Chinese, right? It's human, right? But you don't ask that to other third-party assistants because you don't think that will work. You just don't even give them a chance.
In fact, can only do the affirmative.
If you ask them, show me restaurants except Chinese, they say, here are some Chinese restaurants. So they fail. But even a simple question, right? So we do such a good job, but we just enable more possibilities for people.
Yeah, because what you would ask today is you'd say, show me Mexican and Italian restaurants. You would have to take the negative out, turn it into the affirmative. So yeah, that's a really interesting thing. Well, let me talk to you about the media space, because my theory had always been that you were the perfect match for media. You came from the music area, and then you're in automotive. And I'm like, what are they doing? They should be doing media. Maybe they can do automotive too. But so you've got deals, you've had a deal for a couple of years with Snap. I think there was some expansion of that not too long ago, but you also have more recent ones with Vizio and Netflix, I think is correct. Tell me about that space, because I think if I think about voice assistants broadly and consumer adoption, that is a place where there's been the most consumer adoption, is using voice for interaction with media. How do you see that space evolving and in your position in it?
Yeah, we are super excited about it. Obviously, we did a lot with cars because cars need voice and you don't have to convince them. So,
Sure.
but yeah, we are excited about TV because it's the biggest screen in the most social setting of every home, right?
Yes.
And e-commerce needs to be have to have visual output. Like it needs to be a visual experience and sometimes social experience. Like if you're ordering food at home, everybody's collaborating on what to order, and sometimes you want to see it. And TV is the best place for it because it's in the most social setting and the biggest screen. And the reason it's so untapped is because the input to the TV is that old traditional remote control that you use it to control the volume and change the channel, right? So you don't really use it it doesn't have a really good input mechanism.
Right.
And if you can fix that by voice, and you have conversational audio input, audio visual output with the social environment, that can unlock voice commerce in huge magnitude. And we think nobody has done it right, and we are super excited about it.
Yeah, my thesis is similar, that the next device that we're going to see the biggest movement on is the TV. And I feel sort of funny about it because Bill Gates used to talk about the rise of interactive TV like in 1998. And like as if it was around the corner. And I'm always hesitant to say it's around the corner, but all the technology has come together now. And it seems like the most obvious thing. It seems more obvious to me than smart displays.
Yeah, sometimes companies are ahead of their time, ideas are ahead of their time, even good technologies are ahead of their time, like virtual reality, great demos years ago, but we still haven't seen mass adoption. But voice AI, this is the time for it. People are adopting it, people are demanding it. So we think we are in a really good position.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll just close on this. You've been very generous with your time. What are you most looking forward to? New feature, new technology development? I can't believe you did not mention speech to meaning once in this entire conversation. That's amazing. I think that's usually your most common phrase, but tell me like what you're looking forward to in terms of the evolution of the industry in general. And you can tie it back to SoundHound if you like.
Yeah, I was trying to be careful not to repeat things from the last podcast, but yes. Obviously our tech is what we are proud of the most, and that's our DNA. We are not a one-trick pony. It's not just one person. We have a constant DNA of innovation, right? So that's never going to stop. There's going to be more innovation that's going to come out of SoundHound, both in terms of technology and business model. And the 3-pillar business model that I explained, that's what I'm most excited about now, and realizing that. So enabling more devices, enabling more services, bringing them together to create value for everyone involved: users, service providers, device makers, and more device makers, as we can bring the licensing fees down and create a path for monetization.
So it's the synergies, ultimately, all the things coming together, and that basically enables new applications.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I keep telling people, if you want more people to adopt voice, bring out new applications. Consumers are waiting for it.
Absolutely. And there is room for someone to do it right. I mean, there have been attempts by others, and there have been poor attempts, in my opinion. And we have a good chance to be the one that does it right.
Okay. Keyvan, how can people who are listening or watching today learn more about what you're doing, keep track of what's going on at SoundHound?
SoundHound.com. We try to keep that up to date, and ways to, we have news and social media and so on. So
perfect. All right, folks, I'm Brett Kinsella, host of the VoiceBot podcast. I have amazing entrepreneurs, innovators like Keyvan on here every week. I appreciate it also when they come back and we get this whole span of time. I've been doing this almost 5 years now. So it's been really nice to be able to plant a flag in a number of these different concepts. Go to voicebot.ai for news and go to research.voicebot.ai. We have the leading type research on the voice AI space of anybody. We have more of it for sure, and we think our analysis is a little bit better. So go to both of those, and check out the rest of the podcast and the video channel that we're building a lot on top of this year. Thanks a lot, Keyvan. Appreciate you coming by today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye bye, everyone.